Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. On behalf of the Jukowsky Institute, we would like to welcome you to this webinar on applying to graduate school, specifically here at Brown with us at the Jukowsky Institute. This is the time of year where I'm sure you have a lot of questions and a lot of interest, and things are kind of swirling around in your head. So we're here to help you with the application process and to answer any questions you might have about the program itself. So I'm Rachel Kalisher. I am a sixth-year doctoral student here at the Jukowsky Institute. I study bioarchaeology, so I study human remains. And I am joined by my fellow graduate student, Joe.
Hello, hi, I'm Joseph Carrino. I'm a first-year PhD student here in the Jukowsky Institute. So I just started in September. Research-wise, I'm focused primarily in the Western Mediterranean, especially Italy, and I'm interested in uncovering socioeconomic conditions of rural people. And I work primarily in the Roman period. So with that, I'm going to ask the faculty to introduce themselves. And I'm going to start with Professor Peter van Dommelen.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to this webinar. My name is Peter van Dommelen, and I currently serve here as a director of Jukowsky Institute, and of course, a professor. I work archaeologically in the West Mediterranean, Italy, Spain, and particularly doing long-term fieldwork on the island of Sardinia. My interests are mostly colonial, indigenous matters, cultural interactions, and rural archaeology in that Western Mediterranean Iron Age and early classical periods. And really excited to be here with you in this webinar today. And I hand over to my colleague, Laurel Bestock.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. My name is Laurel Bestock. I'm an archaeologist of the Nile Valley with extensive background in both Egypt and Sudan, where I am currently working. I'm an associate professor of both archaeology and Egyptology and art history here at Brown, and I currently serve as the director of graduate studies. So you'll hear the term DGS, the acronym DGS, a lot today. That's currently me. This is a role filled by various faculty. We usually do it for a couple of years. So I will speak to you in my capacity as DGS today. But I'm also happy to talk about my fieldwork in Sudan, where my interests in Egyptian kingship and colonialism and the lived experiences of ordinary people who run into the project of pharaonic kingship are being explored at a fortress site of the early 2nd millennium BC. Hand over to my colleague, Yannis.
Hello, everyone. I'm Yannis Hamilakis. I'm a professor of archaeology and professor of modern Greek studies here at the Institute and also the Department of Classics. I work primarily the Mediterranean, in the Eastern Mediterranean, mostly Greece. I work from the Neolithic to the Bronze Age, but also to more recent periods up to the present. So I do both prehistoric archaeology, broadly defined, but also what we call archaeological ethnography and contemporary archaeology. I excavate, co-direct an excavation and ethnographic study of a Neolithic site in Thessaly in Greece at the moment. And at the same time, I do a contemporary archaeology project on the island of Lesbos, working on the material traces of border crossing and undocumented migration. I'll be happy to talk to you about my research interests, which are to do, as I said, with prehistory, but also with ideas about the senses, the human body, and notions of the politics of archaeology and of the politics of the past and the present. But in addition to that, I'm here as a chair of the Diversity and Inclusion Committee of the Institute, which actually discusses issues to do with how we can actually make our institute more diverse, more equitable, and address issues to do with any sort of discrimination. So it is important for us in the discussion also to raise issues such as like that. How can we make our community, the graduate community, and the community which as a whole more diverse, more inclusive, more equitable, and more socially just?
Thank you guys for those introductions. So just for context, the layout of this webinar is going to more or less try to focus the questions based off of two themes. The first theme being questions about the institute, about the program, what you might expect. And then the second part of the webinar will focus more on the nitty-gritty questions about the application and what you can expect in that process. So Joe is going to begin with the questions, and I should note, sorry, before getting off to Joe, I should note that the Q&A is open for you at any time. And so please feel free to ask questions, and we will find a way to get those questions to the faculty to make sure that everything you want to know is addressed.
Sure. So I'm going to ask my first question to Peter. Peter, we have archaeologists in several different departments here at Brown. So what sets the Jukowsky Institute apart, and what would you say are the main strengths of the Institute in terms of research themes or really regions of work?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. That's an important matter here, which I think particularly, well, especially for those people who will be applying from outside the US, they might be surprised not to see a Department of Archaeology and find that archaeologists are based in actually 3 different units, 2 departments, art history and anthropology, and then the Jukowsky Institute of Archaeology. And the difference really is that we as the Institute of Archaeology are really focused primarily on archaeology, or, we are all archaeologists and that is what we do. So we get sort of closest to what you might call a Department of Archaeology, whereas in the other departments, our colleagues there are focused on really either particular themes, obviously, as their departments say, more on art historical approaches, or in case of anthropology, our colleagues in archaeological colleagues in anthropology actually focus on archaeology of the New World. But having said that, I immediately want to emphasize that we all closely work together. We all sort of are in close contact with each other across the departments, and the Institute also sort of serves as a place for people to be in contact, and there's cross appointments between the Institute and these and other departments. So connections are actually very close. About the main and difference there, sort of what really distinguishes the Jukowsky Institute from the other programs is the regions, the Mediterranean, Middle East, Europe, Old World has sometimes been said. That is where we work primarily, but it's especially we are first and foremost archaeologists, and that sort of distinguishes our approach. I think I'll leave it at that. There's many of the other strengths will come in other questions.
Absolutely. Thank you, Peter. So this next question is for Laurel, and it's essentially, as your expertise or in your expertise as DGS, could you please expand upon the life course of a PhD student at Jukowsky, including what students can expect with advising, exams, and the dissertation?
Yeah, I would be happy to. That's a huge question, Rachel. There's a reason most people take 6 years to finish the program. So the life of a graduate student in archaeology at Brown at the Jukowsky Institute is roughly split into the first 3 years of the program are coursework years. That's also when the exams are being done, and the first set of exams stress breadth. It is only towards the end of that 3 years, as you get closer towards moving to a dissertation project, that you really start to focus in and narrow on a topic. And the second set of exams, the prelim exams, are really designed to help you move between the breadth and the depth parts of the program. The advising structure we have is also really designed to move between this breadth early in the program and the depth later on. So unlike at many other institutions, we do not, in fact, hook you up with an advisor who will be your dissertation advisor from the first moment. We rather want you in your early years to work with a variety of us on the faculty. We think that you gain an enormous amount by being exposed to different ways of thinking and even different parts of the field. So all students are advised both by the DGS and by a separate advisor, and that the separate advisor rotates over your years. And then as you start to move through your exams, and particularly your prelims and your dissertation prospectus, you will identify a closer set of people at the Institute and usually one particular advisor to help you through that process. But even through the dissertation proposal stage, the entire faculty of the Institute are reading your work, giving you feedback, and helping you become a well-rounded as well as a very deep scholar of the ancient world. Is that enough? You guys can poke at me more if you think other pieces of that need more.
No, I think that's a very detailed answer. It covers a lot. Thank you. Yeah. Now I would ask Yannis a question. Yannis, what kind of careers are students preparing for during their training at Brown? Are they just preparing to be a field archaeologist, or are there other careers that are available to them?
Yeah, I mean, an archaeology PhD gives you access to many and different careers. For a start, many people would want to become academics. Many people would want to go into teaching and research in universities. And I should stress here that we are actually preparing students to go into employment and to academia, not only in the US, but wherever they actually want to work and to study. So the academic routes, applying for a position as a professor at a university is something that many of our graduates actually choose. They may go through various stages at the beginning, like getting a postdoc or getting another research-related employment until they get into that position of getting a tenure track, as we say in the US, or a permanent route into the academic position. But increasingly, many of our graduates go into other careers. Another major sector is that of heritage, broadly defined. That includes the museum sector. That includes other heritage organizations that want to employ archaeologists. And I think that sector is bound to become more and more important in the future, as museums and other organizations want not simply people who know some kind of practical matters to do with the museum, but also people who have the theoretical and the broader training and expertise to deal with the matters, with the series of matters to do with the interface between archaeology, material culture, and the public. So these two are the two obvious and many kind of and important routes towards employment, but there are others. There are people who may want to get employed into various field-related kind of companies. As we know, CRM or contract archaeology is an important sector of archaeology in many parts of the world, with its own problems, its own challenges, as we know. And in fact, some of our training tries to prepare people for those challenges that are to do with the CRM sector. They may want to emphasize, some of our students may want to spend more time, for example, working in the practical side of archaeology and do work in supervising excavations or publishing material from the CRM sector. So these three sectors, the academic, the heritage, and the CRM, are some of the most important career paths. But of course, people then can go into other employment kind of paths, because the diversity of training and the diversity of skills that they gain in the 6 years is so diverse, is so important, so kind of broad, that allows people to diversify, that allows people to actually secure employment in different areas.
Thank you so much, Yannis. That really leads well into kind of the next set of questions. That the diversity of career goal and the diversity of thought is something that is kind of not just a cornerstone of Jukowsky, but also one of Brown, where interdisciplinary work is really heavily encouraged. I myself am a PhD student in archaeology, but I'm also pursuing a master's degree in biology through the open graduate program here at Brown. So I'd love to kind of popcorn it over to Peter and ask about the ways in which Jukowsky encourages interdisciplinary work, and what are the resources that exist outside of the Institute that a prospective student could look to access.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel. That, as you say, that's really sort of a key question. And perhaps it sort of occurred to me as you were asking it, sort of the very shortest answer might be by just the Institute, by just being here, encourages that interdisciplinarity, but there's obviously more to be said about that. And I'd also like to begin connecting it back with the first question that was asked, that just what I was saying, we're all involved in archaeology of the Mediterranean, and that in opposition well, not in opposition, but in extension of what's more usually known as classical archaeology. We actually work on the Mediterranean as a whole, both spatially, as you've heard from our introductions, but also chronologically. It's not just the classical periods, it's from prehistory and to the modern periods. And beyond that, interdisciplinarity is all, well, as you just heard in Rachel's description of the work that she's involved, goes way beyond that. The sciences, but also sort of the connection with art history, the classics, other languages, the Department of Egyptology and Assyriology is physically a neighbor to our building, but also sort of a very closely related department, and we work with many of those colleagues. And interdisciplinarity is actually something that's really in the genes of Brown, you might say. It's really encouraged by the university, and it's facilitated by the way that the university is set up, both organizationally and spatially. The campus isn't very large, but nobody's actually very far away. And collaboration in many ways is always encouraged. And Rachel again mentioned in her introduction that she is also a member of the Open Graduate Education Program, which is a specific program set up by the grad school to actually really encourage and support also. And it's not just words and lofty aims, but it's also actual support in terms of paid time in dollars that goes on to support students to actually make those connections. So it's one of those cases where universities actually putting their money where their mouth is, and that's always good to see.
I would put on my DGS hat and just jump in here and say that it's like, I look at our students and what classes they take, and our students all take classes outside of archaeology while students here. So this is built in again into the whole program and how you do it. I would say it comes close to about 50% of classes taken by our students are within the archaeology program, and 50% are in anthro and history and religious studies and Egyptology and environmental studies and geology. It's really part of it.
Yeah. And that will also work the other way around. I don't think I've ever taught a course or a grad seminar that did not have students from other departments in that course, and that, you know, so it really sort of, yeah, both these observations confirm that point very well, I think.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's very detailed response. Now, looking beyond just the normal semester and coursework, thinking about summers and time away from Brown, Laurel, I was wondering, how important is it for grad students to do fieldwork? Are there opportunities for students to participate in some of the faculty-led projects? And also, can students participate in other forms of archaeological work, like working in a museum?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you, Joseph. You've heard from the three of us on the faculty panel, a part of the panel, that we're all field archaeologists. All of our colleagues in the Jukowsky are, in fact, active field archaeologists. It's an important part of the training in archaeology, and there are so many opportunities for graduate students to get involved in field work. All of us take graduate students on our field projects, not limited to those graduate students who are working directly with us. So again, I work on Nile Valley stuff. I've always taken graduate students whose principal interests lie elsewhere with me in the field, and my colleagues do the same. So in terms of opportunities, there's a ton. We also support our graduate students going on field projects outside of Brown, if you have historical connections with old field projects. That said, is it absolutely necessary that you want to become a field archaeologist? No, in fact, there are other ways to engage with the material culture of the past that you can also be trained for at the Jukowsky Institute. I would highly encourage you to get your feet wet in the field and to incorporate it in your practice, but you don't necessarily need to have that as your chief focus in order to be a successful PhD student at Brown.
Great, thanks, Laurel. So this next maybe phase or set of questions are talking mostly about support and the ways that Jukowsky is supporting its graduate students in many different facets. And so this next question is for Yannis, and it's focusing on how archaeology is contending with this legacy of past practices that were often colonial and ethical and exclusionary to those in underrepresented or marginalized groups. So what we'd love to know is what kind of work Jukowsky is doing to address this both internally and across the discipline, and what are the ways that students can get involved in this work?
Yeah, thank you, Rachel. I'm glad you brought up this issue because it's something that it is very, very important for us at the Institute. We are not an institute that actually focuses more on the specific material beyond its kind of historical, not only archaeological, but also historical context, and within that, the broader political implications of the actual practice and of the actual ideas we produce. So we address these issues in many and different ways. First of all, we address through our curriculum. There are many courses at the graduate level, but beyond also that confront the matters to do with the historical kind of legacy of archaeology. And as you said, it's kind of entanglement with nationalism, with colonialism, with a series of other kind of ideologies, including with white supremacy. And in the last few years, in the context of what many disciplines and universities call the whole decolonization movements, there have been discussions in our institute as well, discussions that do not simply, address it in words, but discussions that try to implement also practical measures to take not only a stance in terms of how do we actually position ourselves, but also take measures to address that legacy of archaeology. So the curriculum, first of all, but also a series of other events that address these issues beyond the curriculum. So we have organized a series of seminars. A few years ago, we organized a conference as part of the State of the Field called Archaeology and Social Justice. Many of your colleagues were involved in the organization of that conference. And the main purpose of that was to address this legacy of archaeology, but also to go beyond it, beyond addressing it, go towards implementing certain measures, academic and other, in achieving social justice. So we're constantly aware of this. As I said, as part of our diversity and inclusion committee, we do not really want to be a bureaucratic committee that just tick boxes or show to the university that we care about diversity. We define diversity more broadly to include other facets of experience and other facets that are to do with exclusion and discrimination, including the political dimensions of archaeology. And we are constantly in that process, as I said. And at the moment, we're actually coming up together with students, with a series of measures on how to do that practically. We are also very aware of what happens in the field, and every year before we go into the field, we have discussions amongst ourselves on how we can guarantee that our fieldwork processes, our community work in the field, are actually not only aware of those issues, but also actively addressing them and making sure that we do not actually reproduce through our fieldwork various practices of discrimination, but also various practices of exclusion, including colonial practices. For example, one key facet we emphasize with graduate students is that when they decide to go and work in a country, let's say in the Mediterranean, they have to be able to understand and even speak to some extent the language of the country. And that is so important for us as a community, and for not, to avoid reproducing the colonial heritage of archaeology. And of course, in addition to that, many projects, many of my colleagues' projects, many of my own projects, are actively working with local communities in doing ethnography and understanding, in other words, what we actually think about archaeology, but also in implementing measures to do with what we call community outreach in the kind of old-fashioned word, but more broadly bringing the communities into the arena of archaeology, and in many cases allow them to voice their own thoughts about the priorities of archaeological work. So we address this matter in many and diverse ways, in the curriculum, in our activities, in our conferences, in the field, and also in the various committees that at the moment are thinking about active measures. And I want to finish by saying we are open to all suggestions or ideas from our own student community, both graduate community and also undergraduate community, and we are willing to work together as a group, irrespective of the different kind of divisions or hierarchies within the institute.
Thank you very much, Yannis. Thank you for that answer. And now I kind of wanted to pivot and talk about money. Peter, specifically, what kind of financial support can students hope to get from the Jukowsky Institute and also from Brown in general?
So I take that, since I already mentioned dollars somewhere earlier in this seminar. So, well, I think we should probably turn around the order of funding institutions. First Brown University and then the Jukowsky Institute, because both contribute. And the short answer that really sort of merits, that really should be emphasized, is that students who are admitted to our graduate program are fully funded. And that's just full stop. There's no buts, there's no ifs, there's just full funding across the board for the 6 years. That's guaranteed from day one until the last day of those 6 years. It includes, well, so here I need to look a little bit. There's a stipend, there's health insurance, including dental and vision. And through the graduate school, but also through the Jukowsky Institute, there's additional support for conference attendance, research travel, and specifically through the Institute for fieldwork, as has already been emphasized in the answers that you've been hearing from Laurel and Yannis, that it's fieldwork properly, but also if you need to go back for community involvement for those things, if it's really to make additional travels or to do some sort of short bit of fieldwork or museum work, perhaps, that through a local initiative that the project might be involved in, and that is in a totally different time of the year, all that sort of stuff is supported, and we make that possible. And so I think that's important to emphasize. But the sort of the important thing to note is that is for admitted students, and I think unlike other countries, other universities, Brown does not admit self-funded students, sort of, in addition to the regular admissions. So that is important to emphasize.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. I'll just add a couple extra things in there. One is that as a grad student, and I'm sure Joe will agree with this, the university is extremely generous with its financial support for graduate students. There is really, I mean, in my 6 years, I've really had no issues whatsoever in getting the financial support that I need to really pursue any project. And so I think that is a really unique thing to find in a graduate program. So once you're here, once you're admitted and you're in, you are really made to feel supported, like your research and all of your professionalization endeavors are going to have that support. And I'll also note that the graduate community unionized a couple of years ago. And so as we continue to kind of navigate the changing academy and the discussions that we're having and the larger community about equal pay and equity and labor rights and all of these things, the graduate students are also bringing their own desires to the table and working with university administration to kind of to get what is the right thing for each of us. So with that, I'll shift, I guess, kind of along the lines of support, but in a more professional space. This next question is for Laurel, and it is what are the opportunities for students to teach, develop their own projects, and interact with the community while in the program?
Yeah, actually, Rachel, that question is directly related to funding. I would say, first off, your teaching opportunities are and your professionalization opportunities are closely linked to the funding that you get. We could even, I think, profitably distinguish between those opportunities that you are required to undertake and those that you can make additional to those requirements. So the funding structure that you are given gives you 2 of your 6 years as fellowship years where you do not have teaching or service requirements, but the other 4 years are funded via TA-ships or proctorships. So the TA-ship is really our means of, it's a symbiotic relationship between professors and graduate students in which graduate students work with professors in their courses as teaching assistants. Unlike at some big universities, this is not just being a grader. This is really a chance to work even often during the stages of developing a class and to work closely with students on much more than grading. I mean, Rachel, you are my TA this semester, one of my TAs this semester. So you're not just leading discussion sections, you're proposing discussion section topics. And you know, you've been instrumental to the way that class works. And the goal is there that of course you help me. You are also being taught to teach in that opportunity in a way that I think is quite rare and something special that Brown does, a way that we as faculty work with our graduate students. That's pretty cool. So you don't have the choice of what classes you are TA for, but all of us work in this mode of teaching our graduate students to teach and fundamentally respecting them and having them as junior colleagues in that partnership. The proctorships, which are the other form by which the funding works, are professionalization opportunities. Again, those are determined by the needs of the institute in line with the interests of graduate students, but we have things that must be accomplished and we have a similar workload, ideally, as a TA-ship would involve for semester-long assignments. So just to pull out one that's one of my favorite because it hits the issue of community involvement as well. We have a program where we go into the middle schools, into the 6th grade in the public schools in Providence. The 6th grade curriculum includes looking at the ancient world. And we and Sarah, our assistant director, has been instrumental in this too, have developed a program for, we call it Think Like an Archaeologist. And this is a program that middle school teachers can sign up for, and our graduate students and sometimes others of the community go in and teach a series of courses and hands-on things to 6th graders. It takes a lot of work and it's fun. And again, that's an assignment you would be handed as part of your funding project, but that's the structure. So beyond the teaching assistantships and the proctorships, there are opportunities for students to develop their own projects and sometimes to teach. For graduate students to be instructors of record is a little bit rarer at Brown than in some other places, but it does happen that graduate students teach courses, sometimes even of their own design, sometimes courses that are on the books. That's not an option that's open to everybody. You really have to be in pretty good shape on finishing your requirements and to have learned a lot as a graduate instructor through TA-ships and through what we call the Sheridan Center. It's a part of Brown that gives certificates in teacher training. And students who go through that learn to develop syllabi, learn pedagogical skills that are useful to them and that show us that you're serious about wanting to teach. Awesome. Maybe we should support you putting together your own class. Projects outside of Brown even are possible. We get a little leery when people try to do too much, and we sometimes want to drag them back and say, hey, how about finishing that dissertation? And developing project. I mean, you're not going to develop your own field project most likely and get a permit to work on your own as a graduate student. But research projects involving museum things or sometimes in the local community. Again, we've had graduate students design a program of looking at burial sites in Rhode Island as a historical archaeology project that's been very important. So really, as with funding, I would say we're eager to support you in your own professional growth, whatever that looks like. Please propose things to us. We have quite a history of encouraging and supporting them.
Yeah, if I may just add to that, so very quickly to emphasize what Laurel says is that we actually support those student initiatives, that students are interested in sort of exploring new directions, new opportunities, and that we don't, think of graduate students who are assigned to a professor and need to sort of work on their project for the time they're here. It's actually sort of, it doesn't mean it can't happen that students want to work on certain projects, and they do, and we're really happy that they want to and they do, but it has to be a choice, and then become involved and do detailed work, get involved in publications and all these sort of things. But it's also perfectly possible to sort of to find your own way, whether on your own or with others. And I think that's again a characteristic and I think a strength of the Institute.
Certainly, yeah. Thank you very much. I think it really, both of those answers really touch on the flexibility that Brown and the Institute kind of afford the grad students. So this next question is really towards Rachel and I, and it's about how would one describe the graduate culture of within the Institute, and also how do the program structures within Brown kind of contribute to this culture? And I think that I would say, just jumping right in, it's a very well-balanced culture. I find that all the grad students are very driven, and I'm always learning a lot from them. They're a great resource, but that doesn't mean that they still don't take time for fun. And they regularly do a lot of meetups, and it's like a social structure as much as it is educational. And I think getting back to, I think it was what Peter said before on just the interdisciplinary and open curriculum type nature of Brown, where people from different concentrations and majors can take classes in different areas. I think that really shows up in the friends you make and the other grad students you end up meeting, because your courses and classwork are full of people from different backgrounds. It really contributes to that. I don't know if you would add anything, Rachel.
Yeah, I think that the graduate community, well, I'll start by saying that basically the grad students work in a giant room, an open floor plan room called the grad studio. So we are all kind of in this centralized space. We're not separated into different facets of the building where we're not talking with each other. So we are kind of always in communication. But even more important than that, I think that the graduate community is uniquely supportive. We're not competing for funding. We're not competing for resources. We're all here. We're all doing different things. And it's really cool to see how we lift each other up. We have arranged grad writing hours where we can get together with snacks and tea and coffee and just ask each other questions. We're a huge resource to each other, particularly through the exam periods, to share study guides and give advice and kind of help, along with the faculty, help each other navigate what it is, because doing a PhD is really hard. It is mentally challenging. You're going to go through some serious ups and some serious downs. And it's really important that you have a community of people that you can be open with and feel supported by, because otherwise it's just too hard. It's just too difficult. And so it's really great that we feel very, very free to organize ourselves and have graduate student meetings and discuss openly with faculty and with each other about what our struggles are and how to really succeed, how to position ourselves to succeed. So I'd say that we have an extremely healthy graduate community here, which I do know from discussions with others, it's not a universal thing. So I'd love to switch to, we have a couple of questions in the Q&A now for the questions about the Jukowsky. I see that our assistant director, Sarah, is typing an answer. So I'll ask the first question that we got, which is, how did you each go about determining what specific form of archaeology you felt most interested and comfortable with? I don't know who wants to start with that one, but.
Peter, you go first. Let's go in the same order we introduced.
Okay. Well, trying different ones, but also to some extent going with opportunities where they arose, because actually I got interested in the Mediterranean early on, although I must say my first excavation was actually in the Low Countries. Well, I don't know where. And I should add to that I'm from the Netherlands, southern Netherlands, and my first excavation was actually before going to university, was in Flanders in Belgium. But from then on, sort of went to study classics, Mediterranean archaeology, and ended up through various reasons on the island of Sardinia in the field of Phoenician and Punic archaeology, which is not really a major stream. It's actually sort of a field that's explicitly multiple times I said not part of classical archaeology, and so which is why it's great to be at a place as the Jukowsky Institute that actually does look further than just those narrow boundaries. But yeah, it's just, I think many of the forms of archaeology are interesting, and it sort of just goes with various opportunities where you end up in.
Yeah, I mean, my interest in archaeology goes back so far that the idea that I was needed to be comfortable with it came much later. I was 12 or 13 when I simply fell in love with ancient Egypt, and I thought it was cool, and that was I wanted to know as much about it as I could, and started on that journey already as an undergraduate. But I started digging. I went on excavations in Ireland when I was in high school, and accumulated as much experience as I could, and the sort of framework for considering how my practice could be needed to be ethical, and what I was doing as an archaeologist has been a much later development in my career, and I would say is in fact still a productive and healthy tension I have between my own fascination and my engagement with a broader world. It's not something I'm done answering.
Yeah, in my case, well, many of you know that I come from Crete. I got an interest into archaeology through actually, growing up and living on the island and coming to terms with the material traces of the Bronze Age, or the so-called Minoan cultures of the island. So, the initial interest and the first kind of projects, including my PhD, were to do with that kind of experiential encounter with the cultures of Crete in the Bronze Age. But then in my subsequent years, the choices were to do with both theoretical interest, but also, I guess, some dissatisfaction with some kind of, with how the theoretical discussion on how the different cultures of archaeology develop. For example, I decided fairly recently to move from the Bronze Age into the Neolithic by doing an excavation in Thessaly, because I felt that the discussion in the archaeology of Crete and Bronze Age was not actually developing that much. It was actually, I saw that there was, first of all, the close-knit community of these people in the Bronze Age of Crete was becoming a bit more claustrophobic and a bit more crowded. And I felt that new issues needed to be developed in a different, perhaps in a different area. I already had an interest in the Neolithic, but I decided to actually dive in a more systematic and serious manner by directing or co-directing an excavation project. And then the other projects, including the ethnography project or the archaeology of the contemporary migration project, or to do with other commitments, to do with the fact that I felt that we archaeologists need to respond to the challenges of the present. And as you know, migration, contemporary migration, is one of the key challenges in the contemporary world, especially migration from the global south to global north. And I felt that we as archaeologists have the skills to contribute to the debate, contribute to the discussion. It's not just a matter for social anthropologists or sociologists or political scientists to talk about what happens today in the world. We can have an impact, we can have a say, and that's why I chose to do that additional project on Lesbos working on contemporary migration.
Thank you so much. Yeah, those are all very interesting answers. I think personally too, for me, I'm still grappling with this question as well as I start my PhD journey. And I think that the Institute is really okay with me not always knowing exactly what kind of archaeologist I want to be. In fact, I think they expect you to pivot and change a little bit as you take coursework and kind of fully develop your interests. I mean, I have a background more in history. My undergrad BA is in history. And so I found that as I kind of grew, as I refined my research interests, I was driven more towards archaeology. And now that I'm trying to further refine that, I think the Institute is a great resource for going and knocking on people's doors and just asking them and picking their brains about just different types of archaeology. Yeah. And now I think it would be a good idea to kind of pivot and talk more about the application in general, beyond just the department. And so this first question is kind of detailed, and I'm going to start by directing it to you, Peter, but please, Laurel and Yannis, feel free to jump in. What are the elements of the application to the Jukowsky Institute for the PhD? And like, how does the faculty evaluate them specifically?
Right, thank you. That's of course a very pertinent question. The sort of first part, which are the elements, is easy to look up for everybody by just going to the Institute's webpage, and there are the links to the whole application procedure. And there are those elements are: we need a personal statement. There is a diversity statement that's required. We need transcripts and letters of recommendation and a writing sample. All of these are important. What's important to sort of note here, I immediately add, is what we do not require, and those are GRE scores. So you don't need to go take a test somewhere. Although I should say there's one exception to that. You do need to take a test if you're not a native English speaker, I was going to say, but it's more if you haven't had your education in an English speaking environment. That's, I think, the more precise definition of it. The personal statement is really important. And I should also note what's not on this is a research proposal. We are not looking for people to walk through the door here with a fully fledged research proposal that's totally finished. And I think that's sort of evident, or I hope it is already evident in the answers, the various answers that we're giving, particularly Joseph speaking just now about still searching, changing, and looking. That's precisely what we want to see. But of course, we do want to know what your interests and what your experiences are that you have so far. I'll leave it with that for now, I think.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, Peter. I think that this kind of touches upon the next question that we had, which is for Laurel, and it's about the personal statement and how specific it needs to be with respect to proposed project and faculty of interest. If you have anything to add.
Oh, totally. The personal statement is an important part of how we evaluate your application. We are looking for the strongest and most likely to succeed scholars to come into the PhD program. And as you've already heard, what success looks like is not narrowly defined. We're not just trying to clone ourselves by any stretch, but we do need to see the evidence that you have the interest, the background, and the forward-lookingness and the stamina to actually succeed in this program. And so balancing that personal statement between not just telling us, but showing us your interest and background as they relate to this, and then talking about what you want to do, why you want a PhD in archaeology, what interests you going forward, what interests you specifically about Brown, why is this a good place to accomplish the type of degree in archaeology you want to do. This is finding that sweet spot of balance is really what you're going for in that statement. As Peter has said, we don't want to see you proposing what your dissertation will be on. If someone writes to me with that question, I always sort of joke, but it's very serious. If you think you know so specifically what you want your dissertation to be on, then you don't need 3 years of coursework. And if you do 3 years of coursework and with this cool faculty and in this supportive graduate environment, and you don't change your mind and your questions, then you haven't actually been receptive to this environment, and it wouldn't be the right choice for you. So what that balance looks like is different for everyone, depending on what your background is. How can you show us through your experience and your projection of what you want to do in the future that you have all of this in mind, and that you are already well seasoned enough to know what you want, and yet not so stuck in your ways that you won't continue to grow as a scholar in the program.
Great, thank you very much. Keeping on this topic of the applications, Yannis, I wanted to ask you specifically about the writing sample. What kind of writing sample does the faculty like to see? Is there a specific ideal writing sample?
No, there is no specific and expected kind of format or idea or kind of sample. Many students send, part of their, some of their essays, for example, during their master's or another degree, which is perfectly fine and okay. I think the criterion would be for the candidate to decide which sample is the most representative of them at this specific moment in time. It could be an academic form of writing, could be something else, but something that they consider themselves to be actually, the best and the most representative, example of their thinking, of their ideas, of their possibly research or other activity, but something actually it's them and they want to be represented by. So that's the only criterion, and we do not impose any restrictions or any limitations on what that would be. But since I want to say something else in relation to the previous question, which I think relates to this. I think in that question was the last part was about atypical candidates, if I read it correctly. And I want to say to everybody that yes, please, all people who consider themselves atypical candidates, please apply to us, because one of our aims at the moment is to diversify our community. We are a global institute for a start. We're an international institute, so we accept applications from all over the world, not just from one country, not just from the US. So that's for a start. And B, we do want to see people from underrepresented backgrounds and groups to apply to us. We want to make sure that, the social reality in this country, but also more broadly, is reflected in the community we have. So students of color, students of, from other ethnic or other minorities, please apply. Students from different social classes, that's also very, very important. We have myself included and others in the faculty who are first generation people who our parents never went beyond, let's say, in my case, the primary school. So we want people who may be intimidated because this is an Ivy League institution. And sometimes people feel this is not for me. Brown is not for me. It's beyond my own kind of culture. And we want to say to those people, no, you're wrong. We are here for you too. So please apply, and we'll make every effort to actually assist you in submitting an application. We'll look at your application with fairness and with support.
If I may add something there as well, to going back to your question, Yannis, is sort of precisely to emphasize what you were saying about how important it is that the piece of writing submitted reflects the applicant. And I just want to sort of add to that explicitly that there may be a misunderstanding, which I think really is a misunderstanding, that when you submit a writing sample, it needs to be something published or so, or that if you submit something published, that it has more standing, more prestige. And that's not the case, particularly if this would be multi-authored, then it might actually backfire on you, because we would worry who has written this and where's the applicant's voice. It's much better to submit something precisely as Yannis said that reflects you as the applicant, and whether it's an unpublished essay or past of an honors thesis or something, that's sort of much less important, or it being published. That's not something that we take into account there.
So trying to keep us to time, I'll try to maybe try to build off of some of this discussion by asking about how language experience and language training plays into the evaluation of the application. So if Peter, you have anything you'd like to add about whether or not previous language experience factors into the faculty's decision.
Previous language experience yes, it factors in, for the simple reason that languages are part, 4 language exams are part of the graduate program, too ancient and too modern in principle, but there's some flexibility in that if relevant for academic reasons. And so somebody who has language experience in whatever language, ancient or modern, obviously that factors into it. It does not factor it in a way that if somebody comes around who's done all these languages, that is somebody we immediately admit. It doesn't go that way, but it is something that plays a role.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you very much. I think we have time for one last question, and I see that there's one in the Q&A. And I wanted to direct it to you, Yannis. So this person's wondering if they said they're an older student, and they were wondering if that would be a barrier for them to enter into a program like the Jukowsky Institute.
Absolutely not. That's the short answer. We encourage students, as we said, from all backgrounds. We encourage students irrespective of their kind of situation at the moment. So yes, we do welcome students who are not the conventional kind of typical age range of candidates normally. So mature students that are older in age, and they have a second chance in a graduate program. They're absolutely encouraged and welcome here. So the criterion will not be the age, won't be, anything else. Will be, the merits and the kind of the work and the ideas and the passion of the candidates to do graduate study.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much. And with that, I would just want to give some brief concluding remarks. First off, thank you everyone for showing up to this webinar. And thank you to all the panelists here for discussing all of the application related questions and all of the institute questions. This session has been recorded. So if there was something you missed, or if you want to send it to a friend or something, it will be posted on the department website shortly. Also, for any follow-up questions that you might think of later that you didn't have a chance to ask, please do email the department, the Jukowsky_Institute at brown.edu. Email address is always monitored, and someone will try to write back to you with an answer to your question, or help direct you to someone who could answer your question. And with that, I would ask, does anyone have anything they want to add before we conclude? No? Yes, please.
Yeah, I just want to say that I personally would encourage people who want to talk specifically about any research that relates to my own area or to my own research to write to me if they want to.
Sure, and all faculty and all grad students' emails are up on the department website if people need to, are looking for those. So thank you everyone for coming, and we hope you have a great application process and a great rest of your day. Take care.
Good luck to all.
Yeah.
Sure. Hi everyone.
Bye.
Bye.